Yes! The killers of 3-year-old Moko pleaded guilty to manslaughter and were each sentenced to 17 years in prison. Before I go to Ali Akram, I want to ask the panel, around the panel, should they have been charged with murder? Eugenie.
Well, it was an utterly tragic case, but I wasn't there. I didn't hear all the arguments and the assessment that the prosecution made. They had good reasons for arguing for manslaughter.
All right, manslaughter. What about you, Andrew Bailey?
I think the Attorney General summed it up extremely well. To get a murder case when there's 2 people in the home is very difficult. What ended up was a definitive result, maximum penalty. I think it's a good outcome.
Okay, do you agree with that, Carmel?
I agree with both of them, and it's really difficult because it's a really emotional issue for all of us, and we can't believe that human beings would commit such a crime. The justice system's the justice system.
Yeah. Oh, before we go to Ali, actually, I want to ask you big changes are promised for child, youth and family. We've talked about this, I said to you off air, didn't I, James Whakaruru, that shocking case many years ago was one that really galvanised me, shocked me. That was in the 90s. Will the latest changes to CYFs make a difference, Carmel?
Unfortunately not. And
how so?
Because all we're doing is the government's shifting money to try and put more ambulances at the bottom of the cliff, and that's not addressing But
it is putting children first.
It's putting the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. It's not putting a fence up at the top. And so, unfortunately...
But that's the slogans.
All of us are going to have to wake up another morning, another week, to another case, like Moko's case.
All right, Andrew?
Hey, this is a really, really hard issue, isn't it? And, there's a question around what's the role of government, what's the role of the family, what's the role of the community. In terms of, and I think we all need to look at each other and have that conversation about why do these things happen in our small communities.
So why do you think it happens? Why do you think it keeps continuing?
Well, there's a breakdown across a number of levels to get to that point. When you heard about the family, the dysfunction around parts of that family, through to some of the care given around it, it's a difficult issue. But what the Minister's trying to do with CYFs is, as you say, is to turn it on its head and make the child the focus, which has never really been the focus. And I think that's a really good thing.
Eugenie, do you accept that?
No,
do you accept what Andrew says?
No, not at all. I think I agree with one of the lawyers in the case, Ron Mansfield, and he said you had to look at the reasons behind the child abuse: poverty, mental illness. If you haven't got a secure home, if you're arguing with WINZ about whether you're going to get a benefit, if you haven't got good access to health services, you're in a position of stress. Child abuse is much more likely to happen in those sort of circumstances. So again, we've got to tackle that inequality. The government's got to build more houses so that people have secure homes. And
that's a different issue though, isn't it?
No, it's not, because poverty is at the heart of this. It's the stress that families feel when they are on the breadline. I can make rational decisions because I'm not hungry. I've got a house to go home to. I've got a warm bed to sleep in. People who don't have that are stressed.
All right, well, let's go to Ali Akram.
Dr. Russell Wills.
Yeah.
You are the outgoing Children's Commissioner. This is your last week in the job. Tough week.
Great week, and what a lovely way to finish by coming here.
Though, obviously, a lot of outrage outside the country's courts this week, and a tragic situation there, and some concern that the Crown didn't go for a murder charge. All the panellists agree with what Chris Finlayson in terms of the direction that the Crown Law took on that. How do you feel?
And the prosecution had no option. And our experience in New Zealand is that people who kill children often get off. It's just very difficult to prove murderous intent in these cases, so manslaughter was the right way to go.
Even after we have changed the law around smacking and removed that defence of reasonable force, still there are issues in getting a murder prosecution in these horrible, horrible cases.
It is, and that's why if we go for manslaughter, we get a successful result with a really high tariff at the end of it. I think that's probably the best result we could hope for. The next thing we need to do is beef up our system, so we've got a good response, and then we need to have a good hard look at ourselves as well, because there is still tolerance of violence towards women and children in our country. Until we face that head on, we're not going to make progress.
What do people need to do, and what change needs to be effected in those families and in those places where violence is tolerated? What do people need to do? Because speaking it up is not always easy. Sometimes it involves turning in your family, and sometimes the ramifications for that person could be prolonged and ongoing.
That's true. But in the end, we need to be brave about this. These are hard things to raise. But while we turn a blind eye towards violence towards children, this happens a lot, and towards violence towards women, this is going to continue to happen. We need to be brave about this. If this is in our family, in our neighbourhood, we need to be able to sit down with someone, particularly if they trust us, and say, mate, your kids and your missus are scared of you, and that's not okay. Let's talk about how we can get you some help for that.
Eugenie Sage was talking about inequality as a driver of these events. Is that true?
Poverty and abuse are not the same thing, but they're very strongly associated. We know that admissions to hospital with inflicted injuries are 10 times more common in the most deprived areas than in the wealthiest areas. So that's a big association. And in New Zealand, that curve is much steeper than in other countries because we have more inequality than many other countries. So we need to address inequality as well.
It is very easy. It is very easy to be disheartened when you have cases like Moko's case come before the courts and see what happens in terms of getting a prosecution. Is there any light at the end of the tunnel on this one?
There absolutely is. We've got the lowest rates of admission to hospital now with inflicted injuries that we've had in a long time. We've got really strong systems within DHBs now. If violence is affecting you and you're in a hospital, you can talk to a clinician who'll be able to help you and keep you and your kids safe. And if you're a violent person, talk to one of us. Talk to a clinician. We can help you to get help and to change. That help's there. You just have to ask.
Thank you very much, Dr. Russell Wills, for and good luck for your last few days in the job.
Fantastic. It's a pleasure having you on the show, Dr. Wills, and all the very best. Let's pick up on something like that. Have you, Carmel, had to sort of be in a situation where you've had to sort of pull someone aside or tell someone? I remember some years ago, I saw a person smack a child in the supermarket, and my wife and I were perhaps a bit ashamed afterwards because we never said to that person, hey, what are you doing? But we didn't think it was our place.
Even within our own families, and just having that conversation in a really subtle, well-meaning way, like there's other ways to do it.
What did he say? What did he say?
People are really open to that, and I think, there's been a lot of criticism about the repeal of Section 59, but it actually has made people rethink how they discipline their children. But, I think we're dealing with not gentle smacking here. We're talking about the severe end of the scale, which is completely
Eugenie,
different.
you were nodding that. Let me just ask before we move on, has the law stopping people smacking made a difference, do you think?
I think, in terms of people looking at other solutions and schools looking at ways children can express anger or deal with their anger, and parents too. So there needs to be assistance there, looking at what are the other ways that you can encourage children to know that there are rules.
Briefly, Andrew, do you think it's made a difference, the smacking law?
Smacking, certainly has stopped overt demonstrations, but people have to find other ways sometimes to work with their children, of course.
All right.